Christmas night. Ju Wan was a man who had never known the presence of a woman in his life. His parents had been the most precious people in his world, but a car accident on Christmas Eve a few years ago had snatched them away from him. Since then, every Christmas had become nothing more than a painful memory for him. While others spent time with their families and children, Ju Wan would wander the city streets alone. His unusually tall stature kept people at a distance, deepening his sense of isolation. That night, too, he was walking aimlessly when he suddenly spotted an old man sitting by the roadside. The man was begging, dressed in an old Santa Claus costume. Ju Wan felt a pang of pity. He took out some money and dropped it into the old man's bowl. The old man looked up and smiled. "Thank you, young man." Then a strange glint appeared in his eyes. "Tell me, do you have a wish?" Ju Wan found the man a bit odd. He started to walk away without answering, but the old man's voice echoed in his ears again. "Everyone has a wish of some kind." Just to brush him off, Ju Wan said, "I want to win the lottery." The old man chuckled softly. "A lie." Ju Wan stopped in his tracks. Looking deep into his eyes, the old man said, "Tell me the true wish hidden in the depths of your heart." The old man's question stirred up the pain hidden deep within Ju Wan's heart. After a moment of silence, he spoke softly. "I just want a happy family, a beautiful wife, and a lovely daughter." A mysterious smile appeared on the old man's face. "Your wish will be granted. If it isn't, I wouldn't consider myself worthy of being called Santa." Ju Wan found this odd. He thought the old man must be a huge fan of Santa. He laughed, walked away, and headed back toward his old apartment. Even on the late-night train, his fate refused to leave him alone. The people around him were smiling with their companions. Ju Wan took a deep breath and closed his eyes. Before long, he drifted off to sleep. But who knew that it would be his final sleep on Earth? When he opened his eyes again, he was faced with iron bars. He was confined in a cage-like wagon surrounded by frail, starving people. Some looked as though they hadn't eaten in days. Ju Wan was in better shape than them, but he was stark naked. The cold air was seeping right into his bones. Just then, his gaze fell upon a dead slave nearby who was still wearing clothes. He hesitated for a moment, but finally, with trembling hands, he removed the clothes from the body and put them on. He breathed a sigh of relief as the warmth enveloped him. Then he looked at the soldiers driving the wagon. They were speaking a strange language that he couldn't understand at all. Moreover, everyone in the cage was shackled in heavy chains. Seeing this, only one thought crossed his mind: a caravan of slaves. And at that very moment, the mysterious Santa's smile flashed in his mind. A bitter expression settled on Ju Wan's face. "That crazy Santa actually sent me to another world." The cold wind started blowing again. Ju Wan kept wondering whether his dream of finding a happy family as a slave would come true, or if that mysterious Santa had played a cruel joke on him. Days passed. Hunger and cold took a toll on his body. His cheeks had sunken and his face looked more frail than ever. Finally, one day, the caravan stopped at a village. The soldiers lined up all the slaves so the villagers could buy them. A tiny flicker of hope ignited within Ju Wan. At the very least, once sold, he would get regular meals. He was confident in his tall stature and strong physique. He imagined a wealthy man would buy him immediately. But reality was cruel. People came, inspected the slaves, and bought them. Yet no one even glanced his way. One village, 2 villages, 3 villages. Gradually, all the slaves who had accompanied him were sold off. In the end, only Ju Wan remained. His last shred of hope was shattered. Deep down, he began to curse the Santa who had shown him the dream of a happy life. That night, as the caravan moved on, Ju Wan quietly picked up a sharp thorn lying on the ground. He could no longer bear the pain. The thorn moved slowly toward his neck. Just then, a shadow stopped right in front of him. Ju Wan's hand froze. He lifted his head, and for a moment his breath caught in his throat. An incredibly beautiful woman stood before him. Moonlight fell upon her face, making her appear like a vision from a dream or an angel. The woman gently extended her hand. In her palm lay a small piece of bread. In that moment, Ju Wan felt that all the feasts in the world paled in comparison to that piece of bread. He took the flatbread with trembling hands and began eating hurriedly. The woman was saying something. Her voice was gentle. Yet Ju Wan could not understand a single word. They spoke languages from different worlds, and yet, for the first time in days, he felt that perhaps there was someone in this strange world who cared about him. Ju Hee-won couldn't understand a word the woman was saying, but the language wasn't the reason. His entire attention was captivated by the woman's beauty and the small, adorable girl standing beside her. The woman held a piece of bread in her hand, and at that moment it seemed more precious to him than a meal from any 3 Michelin-star restaurant. A short while ago, inside a dilapidated wooden house, the woman was having dinner with her young daughter. Food was scarce. The woman gave her own portion to the child, but the girl held half the bread back out to her. "Mommy should eat too." Liz's eyes welled up slightly. Just then, there was a loud knocking at the door. Thud, thud. Liz opened the door. The village chief was standing outside. "Don't open the door. Just listen to me." His voice was grave. "The soldiers have brought a caravan of slaves. One of those men will be chosen as your new husband. Come with me to the mountain in the morning, and have food ready for the soldiers too." Hearing this, Liz turned pale. Her previous marriage had been nothing short of hell. She had been beaten and humiliated daily, enduring constant pain. For a moment, the thought of running away crossed her mind. But then her gaze fell upon her daughter. The child wasn't her own flesh and blood. She was the daughter of her late husband's first wife. Yet, she couldn't just leave her behind. Perhaps the child sensed her distress. She ran over and wrapped her small arms around Liz in a hug. At that moment, tears streamed down Liz's face. She tucked the child into bed and gazed at her for a long time. The child didn't even have a name yet. And that was precisely what frightened her the most. If the new husband turned out to be just like the first one, her life might well become a nightmare all over again. Liz was reminded of her past, of the time her father had sold her for nothing more than a rabbit skin. A man living in the mountains had bought her. As soon as she arrived at his home, he began to beat her. From that day on, her life was filled with constant abuse and pain. Had that little girl not come into her life, she might have broken down long ago. Then one day, her husband went hunting and never returned. Later, the village headman revealed that a wild animal had killed him. His body was never even found. Upon hearing this news, Liz breathed a sigh of relief for the first time. She believed her nightmare had finally ended, but now it seemed as though a new nightmare was knocking at her door. Liz felt a sense of relief upon hearing the news of her husband's death, but her happiness was short-lived. In this world, a woman held no standing without a husband. Yet, thinking of her daughter, she resolved to face her fate once more. The next morning, she baked some bread and went out to the soldiers. Her heart shuddered the moment she laid eyes on the wagon carrying the slaves. A man was about to take his own life by driving a sharp spike into his neck. The sight reopened old wounds. There had been a time when she, too, had contemplated doing the very same thing. Without a moment's hesitation, Liz rushed toward him and stopped him. As she drew closer, she noticed the man's sunken cheeks, disheveled hair, and the despair lurking in his eyes. Silently, she held out a piece of her bread to him. But before she could say a word, the village chief arrived. He ordered Liz to return to her hut and took charge of the slave trading himself. Liz and the little girl cast one last glance at the man before walking away. They had no idea that the man was Ju Huan. Ju Huan stared at the bread in his hand for a long moment. Only a short while ago, he had wanted to die, and now a stranger had given him a reason to live. His entire focus was on the bread, yet he could not bring himself to take even a single bite. The soldiers dragged him out. Soon, he was kneeling before the village chief alongside 2 other slaves. Armed soldiers stood guard all around them. Just then, a soldier stepped forward. He drew a knife and made a shallow cut on each of their arms. A few drops of blood were dripped onto 2 special sheets of paper. The very next instant, the papers began to glow with a soft blue light. Ju Huan's eyes widened. He had never seen a sight like this before. Magic? Countless questions began to swirl in his mind. What kind of world had he ended up in? A world where humans were enslaved and sold, and where mysterious contracts that glowed with the color of blood existed. Once the contract was finalized, a soldier leaned in and whispered something into the village chief's ear. The chief nodded silently. Then his gaze fell upon Ju Huan. He began to walk slowly toward him, as if a significant decision had already been made. Meanwhile, Liz returned to the hut with her daughter. A short while later, a village woman arrived with rations to last them several days. Smiling, she said, "Your new husband doesn't speak our language. You'll face some communication difficulties at first." Liz remained silent. Anxiety was still clearly visible on her face. Seeing this, the woman tried to reassure her. "He may look ordinary, but his hands are as soft as a nobleman's. And don't worry, your previous husband was notorious throughout the village. People only tolerated him because he was the guardian of the mountain." She paused briefly before adding, "If your new husband performs that duty well, perhaps the two of you can live out the rest of your lives in comfort." Liz replied in a low voice, "I don't expect him to be a saint. I just want him not to be violent." Just then, the door to the hut opened. The village chief stepped inside. Standing behind him was a massive man. Liz's eyes widened. It was the very same man she had saved from death a short while ago, but now seeing him up close, she realized just how huge and intimidating his physique was. Involuntarily, her hands began to tremble. Across from her, Ju Huan recognized her as well. She was the woman who had given him bread, yet he couldn't understand why she looked so nervous upon seeing him. Then the village chief stepped forward. He took Ju Huan's hand and positioned him in front of Liz. He then lifted Liz's hand and clasped their palms together. The little girl stood between them. In that moment, they truly looked like an unusual family. Ju Huan didn't understand a single word of their language, but seeing the smiles of the people around him, the chief's look of satisfaction, and Liz's bashful expression, he understood one thing. Someone had got him married. Ju Heevan finally remembered what that mysterious Santa had said. He had promised to give him a wife as lovely as a rabbit and a daughter as cute as a weasel. At the time, Ju Heevan had thought it was a joke, but seeing Liz and his little daughter standing before him now, he realized the old man hadn't been lying. He was happy to see his dream come true, but at the same time, anger was boiling within him. If that Santa intended to give him all this anyway, why had he been forced to endure a hell of hunger, cold, and slavery? Ju Heevan silently vowed that if he ever met that old Santa again, he would make him taste the same kind of hardship. Liz and the little girl shrank back, startled by the anger surfacing on his face. Both were already terrified by memories of their past lives. Meanwhile, the village chief looked satisfied. Guarding the mountain was no easy task. The man who lived there had to be strong and courageous. So he decided to put Ju Heevan to the test. He signaled a villager to step forward. The villager extended his hand with a smile. Ju Heevan didn't understand their language, but he grasped the nature of the challenge. As their hands met, he instinctively exerted force. The very next moment, the villager's face twisted in pain. It felt as though his hand had been caught in iron pincers. Ju Heevan immediately let go, but the result of the test was clear. The chief nodded in satisfaction, then he was handed a bow. After a few gestures, Ju Heevan understood that he was supposed to hunt a fleeing rabbit. He had never fired a bow in his life. Mimicking the stance he had seen at the Olympics, he released the arrow. Shh! The arrow whizzed right past the rabbit. The rabbit escaped, yet the village chief seemed impressed. At the very least, Ju Heevan possessed courage. Just then, Liz and her daughter approached him, carrying a basket. Seeing them, Ju Heevan was momentarily captivated. He still couldn't quite believe that such a beautiful woman had become his wife. Noticing his hesitation, the chief smiled. He realized that this young man had likely never been close to a woman before. So he led everyone away, leaving the couple alone. The sudden silence made Liz feel even more nervous. Nevertheless, she resolved to fulfill her duties as a wife. She spread a cloth on the ground, laid out the food, and fed her daughter first. Then the three of them sat down to eat together. The atmosphere was awkward. Ju Heevan wanted to introduce himself, but the language barrier stood between them. Once again, he felt a surge of anger toward the Santa who had cast him into this unfamiliar world. But when he looked at Liz and her daughter, a faint smile touched his lips. Perhaps it wasn't all that bad. After the meal, the village chief walked them to their home atop the mountain. The path was long and steep. Before long, Liz and the little girl were struggling for breath. Seeing their condition, Ju Heevan stepped forward. Liz immediately grew anxious, but Ju Heevan said nothing. He simply lifted both mother and daughter gently into his arms. Liz's eyes widened in surprise. Meanwhile, the little girl giggled with delight. Ju Heevan began to ascend the mountain. As they walk along, Ju Heevan realizes just how frail their bodies are. At the time, Ju Heevan had thought it was a joke, but seeing Liz and his little daughter standing before him now, he realized the old man hadn't been lying. He was happy to see his dream come true, but at the same time, anger was boiling within him. If that Santa intended to give him all this anyway, why had he been forced to endure a hell of hunger, cold, and slavery? Ju Heevan silently vowed that if he ever met that old Santa again, he would make him taste the same kind of hardship. Liz and the little girl shrank back, startled by the anger surfacing on his face. Both were already terrified by memories of their past lives. Meanwhile, the village chief looked satisfied. Guarding the mountain was no easy task. The man who lived there had to be strong and courageous. so he decided to put Ju Heevan to the test. He signaled a villager to step forward. The villager extended his hand with a smile. Ju Heevan didn't understand their language, but he grasped the nature of the challenge. As their hands met, he instinctively exerted force. The very next moment, the villager's face twisted in pain. It felt as though his hand had been caught in iron pincers. Ju Heevan immediately let go, but the result of the test was clear. The chief nodded in satisfaction, then he was handed a bow. After a few gestures, Ju Heevan understood that he was supposed to hunt a fleeing rabbit. He had never fired a bow in his life. Mimicking the stance he had seen at the Olympics, he released the arrow. Shh! The arrow whizzed right past the rabbit. The rabbit escaped, yet the village chief seemed impressed. At the very least, Ju Heevan possessed courage. Just then, Liz and her daughter approached him, carrying a basket. Seeing them, Ju Heevan was momentarily captivated. He still couldn't quite believe that such a beautiful woman had become his wife. Noticing his hesitation, the chief smiled. He realized that this young man had likely never been close to a woman before. So he led everyone away, leaving the couple alone. The sudden silence made Liz feel even more nervous. Nevertheless, she resolved to fulfill her duties as a wife. She spread a cloth on the ground, laid out the food, and fed her daughter first. Then the three of them sat down to eat together. The atmosphere was awkward. Ju Heewan wanted to introduce himself, but the language barrier stood between them. Once again, he felt a surge of anger toward the Santa who had cast him into this unfamiliar world. But when he looked at Liz and her daughter, a faint smile touched his lips. Perhaps it wasn't all that bad. After the meal, the village chief walked them to their home atop the mountain. The path was long and steep. Before long, Liz and the little girl were struggling for breath. Seeing their condition, Ju Heewan stepped forward. Liz immediately grew anxious, but Ju Heewan said nothing. He simply lifted both mother and daughter gently into his arms. Liz's eyes widened in surprise. Meanwhile, the little girl giggled with delight. Ju Heewan began to ascend the mountain. As they walk along, Ju even realizes just how frail their bodies are. He understands that they haven't had a proper, nutritious meal in a long time. This realization motivates him even more to learn their language quickly, so he can communicate openly with them and provide the good food needed to make them healthy and strong. Liz doesn't know exactly what is going through Ju Heevan's mind, but she clearly senses the determination on his face. Her wariness begins to fade, and she gently wipes the sweat from his brow. After a while, they reach the mountaintop. Ju Heevan thanks the village chief for showing them the way. Once the chief leaves, he heads toward the small mountain cabin that is to be his new home, but the moment his eyes fall upon the cabin, his heart sinks. The dilapidated structure is in such a wretched state that he fears he might have to spend yet another night in the freezing cold. Cursing the cold under his breath, he steps inside, only to stop dead in his tracks at the sight before him. Liz is standing there. Her eyes are brimming with tears, and deep distress is clearly etched on her face. Ju Heevan wants to ask what has happened, but before he can say a word, Liz suddenly turns and runs off. After running for a while, she stops by the edge of a quiet lake. It turns out that while they were away, someone had broken into the cabin and looted everything. Pots, the table, bows, hammers, knives, and even the farming hoe. Not a single essential item was left in the house. Now they didn't even have the means to repair the broken cabin. It was clear that they would have to spend the night under the open sky in the biting cold, with the constant threat of wild animals looming over them. The mere thought of what lay ahead completely shattered Liz. Tears streamed down her face, and she was at a loss as to what would happen next. Just then, Ju Heevan approached her. A look of relief washed over his face upon seeing her safe and sound. He quietly sat beside her and placed his hand gently on her head. Liz did not understand his language, but the warmth of his touch and the concern in his eyes spoke volumes. She could sense that Ju Heevan was trying to give her strength. Surviving in this desolate and harsh place was by no means easy. Their cabin was completely dilapidated, and looking at Ju Heevan, it seemed as though her new husband had never in his life engaged in any strenuous physical labor. However, repairing the cabin wasn't her primary concern. She could manage that task herself somehow. The real problem was food. If they were to survive, they would have to hunt every day. Yet looking at Ju Heevan, it didn't seem at all likely that he knew how to use a bow or any other weapon. Negative thoughts kept flooding her mind. The future was uncertain, and she saw nothing but difficulties ahead. And yet there was a strange sense of peace in her heart. Whenever her gaze fell upon Ju Heevan, she felt an indescribable sense of relief. Somehow she was absolutely certain that no matter how dire the circumstances, Ju Heevan would eventually set everything right. Liz is overwhelmed by these emotions, and tears begin to stream down her face. Meanwhile, Juivan slowly begins to open up about his heart's deepest feelings. He reveals that he lost his parents at a very young age in his own world. There was a time when the entire world seemed hopeless and cruel to him, yet he never gave up. He kept moving forward, facing every hardship along the way. Today he is glad he didn't lose heart, for had he broken down back then, he might never have met Liz. That is why he had made a silent vow to himself. He would protect Liz and her daughter at all costs. He would provide them with a life where they lacked nothing essential and could always remain safe and happy. Liz could not understand a single word he said as they spoke different languages, yet the sincerity of his heart was evident in his face and demeanor, far more than words could convey. She could sense that Juivan truly cared for her and her daughter. This realization dispels the last traces of hesitation in her heart. The very next moment, she steps forward and embraces Juivan tightly, releasing all the fear, pain, and emotions she had kept bottled up inside along with her tears. But just then, the little girl sees her mother bathed in tears. In her innocence, she immediately jumps to the wrong conclusion. She thinks Juivan has hurt her mother, just as her previous father had. Determined to protect her mother, she rushes over without a moment's hesitation, stands in front of Liz, and tries to pull her away from Juivan, but Juivan doesn't stop her. Instead, he gently pulls her toward himself and embraces her as well. Juivan doesn't yet know who the child's biological father was or why Liz bought her and brought her home, but there is one thing he knows with absolute certainty. These two are now his family. In that moment, he makes a firm resolve in his heart to become the best husband and the best father in the world. No matter what, he will give Liz and her daughter a life where they lack nothing and where tears never fall from their eyes again. The family returns to the cabin. As they step inside, an awkward silence settles over them. No one speaks. Having shed tears in front of one another just moments ago, they are unsure of how to break the ice. Finally, Juivan decides to break the silence. He introduces himself by slowly stating his name. Knowing they do not understand Korean, he enunciates each word clearly and deliberately so they can grasp it. Fortunately, both Liz and the little girl are quick to understand. They immediately catch his name correctly. Juivan then smiles, gestures toward them, and invites them to introduce themselves as well. Liz goes first, stating her name and teaching him the correct pronunciation. Juivan compliments her name, then smiles at the little girl and asks her to share her name too. However, the little girl simply stands there in silence, her head bowed. With a look of sadness, Liz explains that her late husband never gave their daughter a name, and after his death, their lives became so fraught with hardship that she too never found the opportunity to name her child. Juivan is astonished to hear this. He finds it hard to believe that a child could live without a name. Right then, he decides to name her himself. He considers several options, but ultimately chooses the name Dorothy. It was the name of the protagonist from The Wizard of Oz, one of his favorite stories from childhood. The little girl loves her new name. For the first time, genuine happiness shines in her eyes. Smiling, she thanks Juivan for giving her such a lovely name. Juivan smiles back, happy to see her joy. Silently, he vows that her life too will be filled with happiness and hope, just like Dorothy's in the books. As evening falls, Juivan is outside chopping thick logs for the fireplace. Standing a short distance away, Liz watches him quietly. Her mind keeps replaying the events of the day. She softly murmurs Juivan's name. It isn't a name from her own language, yet it sounds incredibly pleasant to her ears. This thought sparks a new question in her mind. Who exactly is Juivan? And where has he come from? Ever since she could remember, every man who had entered her life had brought her nothing but pain. First her father, and then her husband. That is why she cannot fathom why Juivan is treating her and her daughter with such kindness. Meanwhile, while chopping wood, Juivan spots her standing in the distance. He smiles, waves at her, and calls out her name affectionately. Liz snaps out of her reverie and for the first time looks at him closely. She notices that Juivan has black hair and black eyes, just like the hero in a story she had heard a while back. According to that story, a fierce war was raging in a kingdom far away. To save their world, the people there had summoned a great hero from another realm, and that hero, too, had black hair and black eyes. For a fleeting moment, a strange hope stirs within Liz. Could Juivan be that very hero? But the very next instant, she smiles at the thought, dismissing it. If he were truly a great hero, how could he be living as a slave in this dilapidated village? Just then, Juivan approaches her. Now seeing him up close, she realizes that his eyes and hair are not black, but dark brown. Liz breathes a sigh of relief. So he is just an ordinary person. Yes, he was certainly a bit taller and different from the others, but ultimately he was just an ordinary man. With this thought, the illusion in her mind shatters, but at the same time, her cheeks flush a soft pink. She herself cannot fathom how she came to imagine so much about a stranger. Juiven finds the mix of emotions playing across Liz's face utterly endearing. Smiling, he gently strokes her head. Liz freezes for a moment as she feels his touch. For the first time in her life, a man's touch holds no fear, only a sense of belonging and warmth. The innocent serenity and faint smile on her face make Juiven's heart race. He cannot hold himself back. Just as a bee is drawn instinctively to a flower, he slowly moves closer to Liz and plants a soft kiss on her lips. Liz's eyes widen in surprise. She had never expected Juiven to do such a thing. Juiven, too, realizes what he has done the very next moment. What have I done? His face flushes red with embarrassment. Unable to muster the courage to handle the situation, he runs away. As he runs, he keeps berating himself. We only met a day ago. How could I do something so foolish? Lost in his thoughts, he doesn't even realize when he wanders deep into the forest. When he finally snaps back to reality, he starts looking for a way back to the cabin. Just then, he senses a terrifying presence behind him. A shiver runs through his entire body. He slowly turns around and his breath catches in his throat at the sight before him. A massive wolf stood right in front of him. It was nearly as large as Juiven, and its glowing eyes revealed only one thing: prey. Juiven's throat goes dry. He is torn. Should he run or stand his ground and risk his life? Finally, he picks up a thick piece of wood lying on the ground and readies himself for the fight. Meanwhile, the wolf is also crouched, poised to attack. The very next moment, it lunges at Juiven with lightning speed. Juiven holds the wood up in front of him like a shield. The wolf's sharp teeth sink into the wood. Seizing the opportunity, Juiven delivers a powerful punch to its face. The wolf growls in pain, but the next instant, in a fit of rage, it bites down on the wood so hard that it snaps in two. Now Juiven is left with no means of defense. He tries to take the initiative and attack, but the wolf proves to be even faster. It clamps its jaws directly onto his wrist. Its sharp teeth tear through his skin, leaving a deep wound. Juiven recoils, screaming in pain. It feels as though his entire arm is burning in fire, but when he looks at his hand, his eyes widen in astonishment. Flames are actually erupting from his wound. How is this possible? Was this magic? A newfound confidence suddenly surges within him. The wolf, too, is frightened by the mysterious flames and begins to retreat, but this time Juiven gives it no chance to escape. He charges toward it, his fist wreathed in flames, punch after punch, each blow more powerful than the last. The wolf howls continuously in pain, but Juiven does not stop until it collapses to the ground completely lifeless. As the wolf dies, Juiven, too, sits down on the ground, exhausted. He looks at his hand, panting. The hand that had been engulfed in flames just moments ago now appeared completely normal. No burn marks, no wounds, even the deep gash on his wrist had vanished entirely. Juiven couldn't fathom how he had managed to use magic without any training. Memories of the fantasy novels he had read in his past life came flooding back. Filled with excitement, he tried casting various spells: fireball, firestorm, firewall. He even attempted a famous magical spell he recalled, but nothing happened. After several attempts, he gave up. He became convinced that there must be a specific way to wield magic in this world, something he would have to learn. But one thing was now crystal clear: he truly possessed magical power, and now his primary goal was to gain full control over that power as quickly as possible, because only then could he become a better hunter, and if the need arose, heal his small family. After all, there was no doctor on this desolate mountain to help them. Juiven clenches his fist tightly. In that very moment, he makes a vow to himself. He will become stronger than ever before, strong enough to protect his small family at any cost and to give them the life they deserve. He never wants to be called cursed again, to be the person people claim brought nothing but death wherever he went. As these thoughts cross his mind, painful memories of his childhood come flooding back. After his parents died, no relative was willing to take him in. Only his grandfather had given him a home, but perhaps even that was not meant to be. Not long after, his grandfather also passed away. Afterward, his cousins heaped all the blame on him. They would beat him mercilessly, calling him cursed, an omen of bad luck, and a harbinger of death. They believed that anyone who cared for him was destined to die. Juivan takes a deep breath and shakes off those painful memories. He didn't have time to get lost in the past right now. He needed to quickly dispose of the dead wolf. If the scent of its blood spread through the forest, other ferocious predators might be drawn to the spot. He hoists the entire wolf onto his shoulders and walks with heavy steps toward his small cabin on the mountain. He knew the wolf's meat could feed his family for days. Meanwhile, inside the cabin, Liz and Dorothy were preparing dinner. Suddenly, Dorothy glances toward the window. She spots a massive wolf outside, seemingly staring right at them. Terrified, she lets out a scream and bursts into tears. Upon hearing her daughter's voice, Liz grabs a knife from the kitchen without a moment's hesitation. Trembling, she moves toward the window. Ah! But the very next moment, her eyes widen in astonishment. It wasn't a live wolf, it was Juivan. Returning home with a dead wolf slung over his shoulders, seeing him, Liz breathes a sigh of relief, but then her gaze falls upon the wounds on Juivan's face and clothes. Her heart begins to pound. Without delay, she rushes outside toward him. She instantly realizes that Juivan has just come from an incredibly dangerous fight. Otherwise, his body wouldn't bear so many marks. Juivan smiles and tries to convey through gestures that there is no cause for concern. They were just minor scratches. And he is completely fine now. Liz doesn't understand his language, but her eyes understand everything. The very next moment, she steps forward and embraces Juivan tightly. For a moment, Juivan is completely stunned. He hadn't expected Liz to hug him herself. Just then, little Dorothy comes running and clings to his legs. She keeps saying something in her innocent way. Even though Juivan doesn't understand the words, the worry hidden in her eyes is clearly visible. Juivan smiles. He realizes that both of them were truly worried about him. This realization touches his heart. But at the same time, he feels a twinge of sadness because he had promised himself that he would never let tears fill their eyes again. That promise didn't even last a single day. The next morning, once things had quieted down, Juivan set about preparing the wolf. He first skinned it and then began carefully separating the meat from the bones. He had watched his grandfather perform this task many times during his childhood. His grandfather loved raising animals and would often butcher and prepare them himself for special occasions. Because of this, Juivan knew the basic technique, but once he started doing it himself, he realized it wasn't nearly as easy as it looked. Still, no matter the difficulty, he had to do this to feed his family. He was just about to resume his work when Liz walked into the barn carrying a basket. Smiling, she held the basket out to him so the prepared meat could be placed inside. Juivan was pleased by her offer to help. He wanted to thank her, but his pronunciation was so awkward that the words wouldn't come out right. Seeing this, Liz smiled gently and patiently began teaching him the correct pronunciation. When Juivan finally managed to say thank you correctly, a smile blossomed on Liz's face, unconsciously. For perhaps the first time in her life, someone had thanked her from the bottom of their heart. In that moment, she realized she had shared so many firsts in her life with Juivan. The first time someone respected her, the first time someone thanked her, and the first time someone kissed her with love. This thought sparked a new question in her mind. Was this Juivan's first kiss too? Or had there been someone else in his life before? As soon as this thought crosses her mind, she feels a slight pang of jealousy. She herself doesn't understand why she is feeling this way. For a moment, her thoughts begin to wander, but she takes a deep breath and composes herself. This was not the time to get lost in daydreams. She still had to help Juivan and put all the meat into the basket. Unable to hide her embarrassment any longer, Liz's face turns beet red. The very next moment, flustered like a small child, she runs out of the barn.